Hi, this is Rob Sheen with the Source Conference, and I'm here with Chris Romeo today. And he's going to be speaking at the Source Phoenix Mesa Conference on February 28th and March 1st. And he's actually going to be doing two talks. One is on AppSec Behaviors for DevOps, and the other one is on building an AppSec program without a budget using some of the OWASP tools. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those and so you guys get to know what we're doing. So welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Rob. Glad to be here.
So the AppSec Behaviors one I thought was interesting because I'm always interested in anything where people are trying to actually change security culture, and that's right in your title is breeding a security culture. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your talk?
Yeah, so the idea with this talk is I've been doing application security for a number of years, and I got introduced to DevOps about 2 years ago. I got called to visit a startup out in San Francisco, and I come in and they said, hey, we've got this DevOps thing all figured out. I mean, they had the DevOps to take the prize of all DevOps prizes, but they said, hey, we have no idea how to do application security. And so I sat down and started going through all their things, and I realized, there's some things we've been doing in application security that we can easily apply to DevOps, and I started to collect those things, and that's kind of where this talk came from. As what are the things, and to truly do DevOps, we have to understand the culture that they follow first. And so part of what my talk's about here is how do we get into the DevOps culture first before we start throwing security around and trying to push our weight into the conversation.
Right. That's cool. One of the challenges I've seen a lot of companies have is, there's the DevOps thing is all over the map. It's kind of like cloud. You ask people what DevOps is and you get a variety of answers depending on who's doing the defining.
Yep.
And a lot of companies are either, getting started with it, or some are further along. But there's a lot of companies that don't even really know where to start. So, if they're starting from scratch, where would they start?
So, I mean, if you're starting from scratch, meaning from a DevOps perspective, it's about continuous integration, continuous deployment, continuous delivery, getting those kind of continuous things worked out. But when you start to add the AppSec kind of pieces on top, some of the places I like to see people get really quick wins is, for example, think about dependency checking. So we have all this open source and third-party software that's got vulnerabilities riddled throughout it, and there's always new vulnerabilities being released. So one place I've had a lot of early successes in taking DevOps and AppSec and bringing them together is let's plug in a dependency checker, just like OWASP has one. There's some commercial ones that are out there, and what that piece of software does is it just sits there, and every time that there's a build that happens, it checks to see, do we have any vulnerabilities in third-party software? If there's a vulnerability, it breaks the build and stops, and then the DevOps people have to kind of come back and the developer has to fix whatever the piece of vulnerable code was. But I found that's just a great way. It's an early win. It's automation, which is what DevOps is all about, and it's a way to instead of slowing them down, to meet them where they are with the speed of software delivery and building software where they want to be.
Got it. And I noticed, one of the behaviors that you had added to your list was threat modeling.
Yeah.
So I actually think that threat modeling is an incredible way to find issues early. And I actually run classes where I teach people how to do it. And I find that a lot of times people have never actually done a threat model before. So how would you recommend that a team get started doing threat modeling if they've never done that before?
So, I mean, one of the things that I've found in threat modeling is it's not something we want to sit around and talk about for a long time. Like, I try to keep any time when I take a new team and they say, hey, come in and help us do threat modeling, I try to spend a maximum of about 30 minutes talking about it, and then say, okay, now let's go to this whiteboard here and start scribbling and start drawing pictures of what a particular feature is that you're trying to build, or let's look at your architecture, because we can talk about threat modeling all day, but people really don't start to get it until they start to see their design come out on the whiteboard, and they start to, and what I like to do is I like to ask leading questions. A lot of times, sometimes I know the answer to the question, sometimes I don't. But I like to ask leading questions to get them thinking about, well, so how is somebody authenticated at that piece that you just drew on the board? How does authentication fit into that? And then just let them start to go. And one of the things I always like to see, I think about the security light bulb. And if you've done threat modeling like I have with teams for a while, the security light bulb is you'll have somebody who's sitting there and all of a sudden the light bulb will just go on like ding right over the head. They'll be like, oh, crap. We had a guy run out of a training class one time because he realized how bad something was that he had done a few weeks before, and he's like, I got to go back to my desk and fix this before I can talk about any more training stuff. So
I've had the exact same experience. I've had people leave the room because they're like, "Uh-oh, I got to go fix this problem."
yeah, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, they've seen the light, which is really what my talk here is about, is how do we get those that are ingrained in DevOps to get that light bulb to go on over their head, and to do that they have to understand some of these behaviors that we're talking about, and we also have to understand kind of where they're coming from so we can meet in the middle.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're definitely going to have some cool conversations in Phoenix then, because I definitely have had very, very similar experiences with what you're talking about. Getting that light bulb to go off is definitely key to getting them, because once you're gone, they have to be able to help themselves. And if they've not gotten the light bulb to go off, that they're just going to go back to doing whatever they were doing before.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely.
So the other one I thought was interesting was you mentioned code review. Now, in 2017, code review generally means something very different than it meant in 2001. So for code review these days, are you thinking in terms of automated tools, or do you still recommend people do any kind of manual code review?
I think there's got to be a mix of both. I mean, the technology is grown leaps and bounds in the last number of years. So and DevOps is all about automation. So we got to have the automated tools in there looking for the easy stuff. But I still see value in the manual code review. And I've seen different companies doing DevOps that are doing that manual code review with really good results. One of the things I've seen a company do is they actually integrated with GitHub, and they used GitHub for their source code control, and they had to have somebody who was kind of blessed as a security person that would actually give their code a like when they had a commit that they checked in. And until they got that like, their source code, their build system would not automatically integrate that code and push it out. And so I think there is still value. I think the tools are they're good, but they're not as good as the human brain when it's focused in on some very specific things. And there's things that the tools don't understand logic. They can't see, oh, you forgot access control on that module. The tool just says, hey, I see cross-site scripting. The tools are good at that type of stuff, but they're not good at going, man, you should have put access control into that giant piece of your application that you forgot.
Right, exactly. I mean, it could check for did you make the appropriate API call to the access control function? But unless it knows that module even needed that, then how is it going to know that?
Yeah. So that's where people. Yeah, I think people are the people side of this is. I'm a big proponent of the people side. Just like everything else in the world, it's all about, it's people, process, and tools. But those three all have to work together. And if you take one of those pieces out, good luck. Good luck with trying to secure your application.
Right. So is this something that really only the big companies with a lot of budget are going to be able to do, or can small and medium companies?
Nah, I mean small and medium. DevOps and this accelerated software delivery really started in the startup world. And so, these startups, even though they're funded, they don't have it's not like they have a lot of money for infrastructure and developing all these other things. So, yeah, DevOps is something that works. Application security with DevOps works regardless of how big your company is. And everybody's going there. It's just like, DevOps is the new Agile, right? We all did waterfall for 100 years or whatever in the world of software, and then Agile became the new thing, and everybody got into doing Agile. And just like your example of defining cloud, I find the same thing with Agile. I love to go into a company and say, hey, what's your development methodology? Oh, we do Agile. And I say, oh, okay, what does that mean? Explain that to me. Tell me what that means. The same thing with DevOps, but it works for all different sizes of companies, and it's really, it's the way of the future. There's really not going to be, you're going to have to go here, regardless of how you, what size your company is, because people just want new features faster. It's just the way the world works.
Right. So you just made a good point about features. So a lot of companies, especially startups, I've noticed, tend to focus most of their development effort on features, especially if they've not gotten the security memo yet, or if they've not had an incident. Yep. How do you get them to take it seriously, particularly the managers and whatnot and the executives, when really what they're focused on is their bottom line and trying to get the features deployed to their customers fast enough?
So I find it's different depending on the size of the company. So I've just, I've acknowledged the fact that if you're working with a startup, they're going to have a their risk tolerance is going to be much larger than a financial institution is going to have, and that's just the way it is. So with them, I look for how do we get them the things that, how do we help them embed the AppSec pieces into their build pipelines and things that aren't disruptive to what they're trying to do. Now, you start talking about big enterprises, then they really are seriously concerned about data breaches. You think about a startup might not survive a year from now, even if they don't have a breach, if they don't get that feature velocity going. So with an enterprise, I think we've got more room, and I tend to spend more time speaking with the executives and making sure they understand what are the ramifications if you do experience a data breach. If you have an Equifax, if you have your own Equifax here, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your organization, for your customer reputation? And so it definitely a different answer depending on the size of the company.
So the other talk that we had chosen of yours was the one about beyond the OWASP top 10, which I thought was great because I've been waiting to see a good comprehensive talk for a long time on what OWASP offers that's not just the OWASP top 10, because the OWASP top 10 is cool. It's a good awareness raising thing, but it only goes so far. And, in all the years that they've been doing it, we've not even really solved the OWASP top 1 as far as I'm concerned. So
I use that joke as well. So that's a good.
That one's kind of spread around. Yeah, that one happens a lot. So what are some of the things beyond just the top 10 that are out there that we can make use of that you're going to talk about in your talk?
Yeah, I mean, the OWASP universe is so vast, and I only really figured it out because I kind of was looking at how do you, I was looking for different kind of training topics and things, and I started to poke around all the outside edges of OWASP, and I was like, holy cow, there's a million different really cool projects here that nobody knows about. And so I started to think about, if we pull back and say, how does somebody that doesn't have a large budget, how are they able to build an application security program? And the only way they're going to do it is by incorporating some of these OWASP pieces. So what I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to introduce people to a lot of the things they don't even know exist, like the OWASP top 10 proactive controls. A lot of people I meet have never even heard of that project, and I would, in my opinion, that's more important for developers than the OWASP top 10 is, because the proactive controls are about, okay, how do you take the lessons, the things that we made you aware about in the top 10 and apply those to your daily life? They have one, parameterized queries is one of the OWASP top 10 proactive controls. You can talk about SQL injection all day long, but if the developer doesn't know how to fix it, that's what the proactive controls does. Some other projects that we'll talk about, the OWASP cheat sheets. So OWASP has like 50 or so different cheat sheets. They have one on password storage. They have one on avoiding injection attacks. They have one on avoiding how to do authentication correctly. They have all these different pieces. And so what this talk's going to focus on is how can somebody, and I know nobody has a budget of zero, it's a catchy title, but, people have some amount of budget for people, but they don't necessarily have millions of dollars to buy all the latest and greatest tools. So I'm going to look across the OWASP universe and say, how do you use proactive controls? How do you use the cheat sheets? How do you use mod security? Mod security is a web application firewall. Majority of the web application firewall vendors now, guess what they use as their core? Mod security from OWASP. So if you can take that, and so I'll just look at all the different facets of running an AppSec program and say, okay, here are some specific projects from OWASP that you could plug in and use that won't cost you anything.
That's great. The one thing I will say, though, is there are a number of companies that do actually have a budget of zero, and that's because they haven't thought about security yet, or they haven't really incorporated into what they're doing. It's shocking to me how often I find clients that I work with or potential customers or just companies I talk to in general that they just haven't started doing security thoroughly in their environment yet. So they haven't allocated the budget yet. So they might have the budget, but they just haven't allocated it, and they're not going to spend it until they do. So part of that is getting them to understand, how to get that light bulb to go on, but then, giving them an initial set of tools that they can get for, inexpensive/free is definitely a great start.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking to do here. And the funny thing is I went looking for this talk originally because I wanted to consume it. And then I said, oh, well, no one's ever actually done this. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And
I've been looking for this talk for a while, and I wanted to consume it. So as soon as I saw yours, I'm like, oh, I want that. So that's how you ended up on the list, man. So,
awesome.
Cool. So part of the nice thing about Source is we tend to be a more intimate event where people can actually interact with the speakers and
Yep.
talk to everybody. So if any of this stuff is interesting to anyone listening out here, I definitely encourage you to come to the Source Phoenix and interact with Chris and myself and continue this conversation. We're definitely going to be having a good time that week. So
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing. I've attended the Source Boston conference, and I'm hoping you're doing the speed networking thing again in Phoenix, because I mean, I think I told you this. I sent you an email after the conference, but I go to a lot of conferences. I get a chance to speak all over the world, and that is the first time I've had an experience where I actually left that room meeting 6 different people, and then I had conversations with them in the hallway throughout the rest of the Source conference. So I want to give you kudos for that. That is one of the coolest things I've ever seen at a conference, and that alone there's going to be great speakers at the event, a lot to learn, but that alone was, in my experience, was just a great time, and I really enjoyed that part of the conference.
awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, we try to do more than just have the conference be a place where there's great talks. We always get great speakers, but it's what we glue it together with that makes it really work. And
Yeah.
the reason we do speed networking right after the first keynote is for exactly the reason you mentioned, which is you meet a few people, you get to talk about light things that aren't that consequential, but you get a chance to actually interact with another human being. And then throughout the next couple days, as you see them in the hallways, you now have something in common because you had a conversation with them.
Yeah.
And so I find that really works. A lot of people kind of give me high fives, virtual high fives as we leave that session. A lot of people seem to like that. So
Yeah, cool.
awesome. Well, looking forward to the event, and we'll see everybody there on February 28th and March 1st at the Source Phoenix Mesa conference. Talk to you soon.